All right, get right into it today. Today's lecture is about indifference. So it's a one-word title. One-word title. That's weird for these lectures. Usually these lectures have big long titles, but today it's just one word. So that makes the definitions a little bit easier for me, which means I'll have more time to talk about the topic. So indifference. Well, there's a lot of different ways to talk about indifference, and depending on your views of indifference, you may feel very passionately about some of those, which is quite ironic. Uh, it would be ironic to get worked up over the definition of indifference. Uh, so indifference, usually in the common context of things, indifference means you don't really care. It's the absence of emotion is indifference. It doesn't matter. Indifference is a lack of care. Like hate is a type of caring. You care very much that this is wrong. That's the way that breaks down, because love and hate are really two ends of the same spectrum. So it's just the flavor of the feeling that gives it its name, but the intensity of it can go, from one extreme to the other. So that there's feeling there. Something is powering that. But indifference is like a lack of locomotion. So when I talk about indifference today, I'm going to use a very specific angle to help break out of that, because it's one thing to talk about indifference and to explore what indifference is. But I always like to take the top-down approach, because judging on going by the previous lectures, if you can ever give your idea an extra dimension of thought, if you follow the advice on how to do that from the previous lecture, which is when you talk about a thing, you have three pieces of information that give you a bigger view. You have whatever that thing is at its maximum value. You have whatever the opposite of that thing is, and it has an equal value of strength. And then when you look at that full range of a thing and its opposite, with full power in either direction, then you have one concept. And if you can understand that concept, generally speaking, you are going to have yourself a better understanding of just everything that is inside it. It's like saying, as you talk about apples, right? Well, there's 100 different kinds of apples. But if you compare how many kinds of apples there are to how many kinds of things there are in the universe, well, your list goes from infinite to just kind of large. Like the number of apples that have been produced and crossbred and grown since we've had farming technology is nowhere near infinite. It's probably less than, I would say it's probably less than 10,000. And they say to be an expert in anything, you need to spend 10,000 hours on the subject. So if you really wanted to, you could spend an hour on every kind of apple and how they're different from every other kind of apple. And you would, there would be nothing that could be said about apples that you wouldn't know, at least as far as we understand them. So what I'm saying is that when you view information that way, it's possible to begin your education of whatever topic you want to study with the things that are always true all of the time, instead of going through at the back end and saying, well, this is true when this happens, and this is different and this happens. And those are all true statements, and you can map those. As far as the day is long. So you can map those as far as the day is long, and you'll learn things. You'll learn things that are specific to that, and you get to keep that. So fair enough. It's not wasted time. But there are things that could be said that are true about all apples. Apples grow on trees. Apples have skin, which you can bite through. Apples have seeds in the middle. they grow during certain times of the year. They like certain climates. So, and then there's subgroups of these things where they share some traits. Like all of these kind of apples prefer 80-degree weather. There's like 10, 100 of them. And then this other 100 apples, well, they like it at 85 degrees. So then you can have like these large groups, and you can label those by how they're similar instead of how they're different. So why do I talk about that? It's because, well, a lot of times when you run into information, people are going to talk about information in ways that it's different. And different from the way that, that you talk about it, or different from the way that they're going to talk about the differences in ways they feel make the thing they're talking about unique. So because it is different in this way, it is this. And there's a lot of utility to that type of thinking. That type of thinking is very strong. How to tell two things that are different apart is useful, but you can't get caught in a false dichotomy of saying just because two things are different in one perspective, that doesn't mean that those two things are not the same in a different perspective. All apples are made of atoms. All apples have an atomic structure to them. Well, that's true. All apples contain energy. Well, all apples have mass. So E equals mc squared. Of course, all apples contain energy. Does that tell you anything new about apples? No. But it does tell you how apples and energy relate to each other. So if your only source of information was apples, and your goal was somehow tied to energy, that's in a pretty important link in the chain. So how things are the same is how you can build. How things fit together is how you build. So much of this class, series, whatever you want to call it, has been about how to tell things that are different apart. And the reason to tell things that are different apart is so that you can figure out how other things that are the same can fill in some pretty big gaps, which can't be filled in by saying how something is different. And I'll get examples pretty soon, but so that's kind of the definition part. So the indifference at its core is a lack of emotion. And I'm going to slice the conversation about indifference in a very specific way. And the reason for that is I spent some time thinking about this. Like, how do people talk about indifference? It's always emotions. It's always emotions. It's always emotions. And fair enough. Indifference is a calibrating tool for emotion. If somebody doesn't care, you have made zero impact emotionally. And there are times when having zero emotional impact is a good thing. And there are times when having zero emotional impact is a bad thing. So you can't really break it down into usefulness based on the emotion. It's situational. You could come up with as many examples of how it's good to be indifferent as you could of coming up with many examples of how it could be bad to be indifferent. So there's not a morality component to indifference. It's just a different type of potential. But it's a very weird potential. It is a stable potential. Most of the potentials that we talk about are movements, up, down, more or less, greater than, less than. This one is equal to. So the indifference is an equivalence type of behavior. So let's talk about indifference on a spectrum. We talk about everything that's on a spectrum. To be on the spectrum is a very interesting way to talk about autism, by the way, because the opposite of a spectrum is, or not an opposite, but the best friend of a spectrum, like the alternative to a spectrum, is usually a dichotomy. Well, this person is or this isn't. Well, that person's a spectrum. Well, one of those televisions has more channels on it. One of them's on and off. One of them's cable TV. So that's kind of how difference and indifference, that's kind of how difference can behave. But let's talk about indifference in terms of how it's a mathematical type thing, because I like to use the same language. So I'm going to talk about indifference in all the same ways that I've talked about all the other things. And that's going to be a math portion, that's going to be a mind portion, it's going to be a memory portion, feelings portion, like all of that is part of the human experience. And our imaginations are not so limited that we can only hold one direction of explanation at a given time. So the first way that I'm going to talk about indifference is mathematically, because the math for me is what guides the process. The universe behaves mathematically. And Albert Einstein gave us the best tool of all for knowing what could be there. So forget about needing to need a PhD in physics to understand Albert Einstein. There's a lot of people out there who do that kind of math, and they use it to do all sorts of stuff, like make your GPS and look to the deep reaches of space, and to try and invent new computers, and all of that uses Albert Einstein's equations, and it uses them in ways that are very precise, very technical, and it's pretty much, they're trying to do a very specific thing, which means a very specific process is needed. So that's what the math does. The math can be specific enough to give that process. But another thing that math does, which doesn't need all of that understanding, is it can show trends. It can show behavior visually over time. And a picture's worth 1,000 words. And when I talk about the mathematics of indifference, a different way of saying that is indifference is the amount of indifference is equal to the amount of things that are not different to a person. Whoa, what's that all about? Nobody talks about indifference that way. Well, I'm telling you, the opposite of indifference, mathematically speaking, is difference. All right? Indifference is zero difference. You don't care enough to separate them. And this here behind me, this graphic is called an indifference curve. They use it to talk about commodities. It's a behavior that that companies use to decide how to sell, the right product. Like Apple and Android are good examples. Like, you want the iPhone or do you want the Galaxy? Those are the two phones right now. The iPhone or you want the Galaxy? And if you look at these graphs behind me, what they mean is that for some people, they will have a very strong opinion that they want the iPhone. And for other people, they have a very strong opinion that they want the Galaxy. But there's a large chunk of people that don't care so long as they have a phone. So in the commodities world, when they talk about a difference, they're mapping things that are not different to the customer. It's an indifference curve. They don't care. So that got me thinking, well, what happens if we apply indifference to the concept of, like, what happens if we take that model of the indifference curve and apply it to emotional indifference? Well, a different way of describing emotional indifference is a lack of difference in situations regarding how much emotion they cause. Do you want to be in this chair in your house or the other chair? Well, it depends. Is that one your chair? If you have like a neurotic connection to that chair, if anyone else sits in it, it gives you a problem. Well, then you're not indifferent to the chair that you sit in. You care very much. But if you go sit down on the couch, and it doesn't matter if you're the left cushion, the right cushion, or the middle cushion, or if you got a friend who's coming over, if you take the chair next to the couch, and if it's all the same to you, Well, that's indifference. It's no different to you. Mathematically speaking, you would measure emotion through the percentage of difference there is between something that matters and something that doesn't. So if you really want to get technical, emotion and the difference of emotion, the inspiration of emotion would be measured as indifference increases over time. Technically, that's a bad way of saying it. Indifference, the difference increases. My integrals, man. The math lingo. It's been so long since I've been to college for all this. So as your emotional attachment to a thing changes, that is the rate of change that measures indifference. So it can be very small, meaning there's almost no indifference, meaning you care, or your indifference can be very large, and it's all the same. So let's talk about what that means then. So it's kind of a mind-bending phrase for me to say. I'm talking about the difference between difference and indifference. It's nonsense. The word's nonsense. The concept is not. So when we talk about indifference, what does that mean to a person in their life? How does it affect? So let's take an example and see what is common about indifference. So let's take an indifferent person and let's make this person so indifferent that other people get to tell them what to do. They don't really care about that either. They don't care if people leave them alone. They don't care if they participate. They don't care if they don't. What is that person? To some degree, that person is all of us. At certain times, anyways. It's highly situational. How many things happen in your life that don't register? Does what's on the television change your day? Does what's happening on the surface of the planet Jupiter with all of those crazy storms that are being measured, and how they react to solar flares that happen once every 100 years, or how the density is changed and how the vortices interact. Let's say an asteroid hits a gas giant. If anybody remembers, a few decades ago, it was a very big deal that we had live video of a bunch of asteroids hitting Jupiter, and they were big ones. It was like a spectacle. People cared about that, but it was in the news. But what about today? That stuff still happens. Some planet in our solar system, or some moon, or something, is getting hit almost every day. And because of the way gravity works, the gas giants take most of that hit. Kind of protect us from the debris of space. The sun and the gas giants kind of keep the Earth a little safe. We're not invincible, obviously. We still get nailed every now and then. But it makes a big difference. According to the people who study those things, they believe it does. I was one of those people for a while. I still dabble. But most of those things, you would look at that and say, well, it doesn't really impact my day. Now, who Kim Kardashian is going on? Ooh, I gotta stay on top of that. There's no indifference there. That gossip is way too fresh. Super relevant, right? It's a silly example, but there's some people who might even be offended that I took that example and say, yeah, it does matter. And fair enough, to them it does. Like, we all pick different stuff that matters to us. And that's kind of a good thing, because if everybody cared about 100% everything the same way, that would only make a good world if everybody was right. So if we don't have it 100% right, then it's a good thing people are trying different stuff. Because maybe out of a few hundred people, or a few thousand people, enough of the right idea is present that maybe you can build the right idea if we get together and work on it. So that's kind of one way to look at indifference, at least as far as how it impacts the life of someone. But you've got a person, say, who just doesn't, they just don't care at all. What is that person? Well, we have insects that behave that way. Like they don't have the complex mental framework to experience emotions the way that we understand them. It's more of like an instinctual drive, and it's very rudimentary. It's go towards the thing or go away from the thing. Like you really don't have these coalitions of fruit flies who are going to get together and campaign for better fruit fly treatment for fruit flies that they've never met. It doesn't happen. Maybe in Pixar's A Bug's Life, that would be a fun little scene. But that's a human quality, as far as we know. Monkeys do that a little bit too, but not really. Not the way people do. Monkeys don't remember over time the way people do. Just to say what that means. Just to say that right now it's different. Whether or not that makes you indifferent, there's things that can tell you. So why all of this focus on why people don't care? Why should I care if I don't care? It's a strong question that should not be dismissed easily. First question that I would ask is if someone said, why should I care that I don't care? Is, well, did you ever care before? Because then you know the difference between what it means to care and what it means to not care. And you're making a choice, informed choice, one that has lived both examples and can tell the difference from the inside and the outside. Why it would make sense to care about something or to not care about it. Well, if the answer is no, is I've always just not cared about it. And maybe you're right. How could you know? You only know one thing. You can't compare one thing to nothing. You just compare it to itself. So why should I care about the things I'm indifferent? You should only care enough as much as it takes to make you, I guess, be happy with how much you know. Because not caring about things isn't a virtue, it's a behavior. It doesn't become a virtue just because a person does it. It becomes a virtue because it carries the reason why a person does it. So it's not enough just to say, oh, indifference. It's the same thing as saying, oh, compassion. Oh, understanding. That's foolishly simplistic. To the point where it denies observable truth. Like, why shouldn't you care before you give out compassion? What if it's something that doesn't deserve compassion? Does everything deserve compassion? Hey, I just did this awful thing to this person and I'm going to do it again. That's not a call for compassion. There are other things that need to happen before compassion is the right step. And hopefully, if those things are done soon enough, compassion is possible somewhere down the line. But until that decision changes, compassion is just going to enable it to do more. Become complicit, willingly complicit. You're offering aid, making it easier So compassion on its own is not a virtue. And shaming people for not having it. Well, that's something that criminals do. That's what manipulators do. If anyone's trying to sell you a feeling, when you're still trying to talk it out, that person's probably a liar. Especially if they're saying you shouldn't care about the reason that you're talking about, because this feeling covers it up and makes it go away. Now, when I say that person's a liar, am I saying that that person is lying on purpose? Absolutely not. We've covered 100 chapters, not 100 chapters, probably 100 hours though, about how easily it is for a person to lie to themselves. And if someone says, well, how do you know you're not lying to yourself right now? I say, that's a great question. Let's compare how long each of us have been working on this problem and see who has more notes. You don't go to the gym and say, I could bench press 800 pounds because that guy's doing it. You might say, eventually, you could bench press 800. That's an exaggeration. That's more than the world. I don't even know what the world record is for bench press, but I think it's over 1,000 pounds. I don't know. Point is, if someone who does a thing regularly to the point where they have trained in it for months or years at a time, well, for someone else to walk in and tell them how it's done, that's the height of indifference. That person is indifferent to your life. Your life is no different than any other life to them. The only life that is different is their own. Which is a very nasty place to get trapped in psychologically. Everybody else is the same except me. Or all of those people who share this one thing are the same. You know who talks like that? Depressed people. You know who talks like that? Angry people. Because they're indifferent in ways that hurt them. They're indifferent in ways that come back to bite them in the ass. Because they label things with the same sticker when clearly they should be going in different boxes, mentally speaking. Oh, all of those people are the same. So what happens when you treat all of those people the same way and you don't think very much of them? Now, you've given yourself permission to just write off large swaths of the population. Fine. But you're everyone else to somebody. You're everyone else to somebody who is not you. So indifference to the lives of other people, unless you are just the worst liar to yourself in human history, you can't deny that to every person who is not you, you are someone else. And I'm going to actually type that down because that's the first time I've said that. And I kind of like the idea because it's a very, what's the word? A very compact way to say that. So I'll repeat that one more time. So everybody that is not you, you are someone else. So if nobody's any different, you shouldn't expect people to treat you differently because of who you are. You can. People do all the time. And we have a name for those people. Hypocrites. I didn't make the name up. Hypocrite means somebody who acts in a manner that is inconsistent with the advice they give or the things they believe. So if other people are all the same, they don't matter to you, then you have to accept you don't matter to the world because you're the same as everyone else to everyone else. So if I were looking at this as a math problem, that would be a paradox. Or a moment, if I were to translate that into a different, less specific term that means the same thing in the context of this conversation. It's a contradiction. And a lot of people have many approaches to handling contradiction. The first one is to say, well, the idea is obviously wrong. Maybe it is. That's not the only answer to contradiction, especially when you're talking about something that has been mapped out by someone else who spent a lot more time on it. Like if somebody has spent 1,000 hours, and that's not an exaggeration. Somebody spent 1,000 hours developing a thing, and they try to defeat it every way, that they can imagine, and they've called in other people to try and defeat it, which is what a peer review is, by the way. They've called in other experts in the same field to say, well, what about this? What about this? How can this? And they put their idea through all of these tests. And someone else comes along and says, oh, there's a paradox. Here's why it doesn't work. And you're stupid. Now, that person's morally and mentally equivalent by their actions, not by their intentions. Their intentions could be totally pure. But they're using the actions of a person who is walking into the gym and saying they could do better than a power weightlifter on their first day. I could easily beat you. Where's the chalk? I could do way more than you. How do I make this machine do what it's supposed to? I'm just as good as you are. Why are these weights not moving for me? This gym is stupid. You could look at that person and say, obviously, that person doesn't know what's going on. But in the realm of ideas, that's a very similar thing. When it comes to dismissing an idea that has been thoroughly thought out with, because your first question was impossible to answer, which means you thought you were the smartest person in the room. Maybe you are. But you have to understand what's being said. Specifically, what is being said about why the paradox is actually a bad measurement or a bad assumption being made about the process. Math does this all the time, so it's easy to say. Like if I observe a thing in the universe, and it has something in common with one set of, and I'm not going to get specific because the idea doesn't need specifics to explain it. If I'm looking at one kind of math that I think explains a thing, and it doesn't make the prediction, and it doesn't work, then I would be foolish to say, well, that thing doesn't matter. That thing isn't real. That thing is not working right. When the proper answer would be, am I using the right kind of math? Just because we can imagine a thing doesn't mean we can't imagine how a thing works. Free will is a great example of this one. I don't have all of the free will in the world because I have restrictions on what I can think and know. Therefore, free will does not exist. Well, that's a self-centered view of free will. That says if I can't have all of free will, nobody can have any of it. Because it couldn't exist unless I could have it all. There's some assumptions there that power that. We covered a whole topic on free will. The assumption is you can't get more of it or have less of it than someone else. The concept of free will is too simple to sustain the topic as it behaves in the real world. So, indifference. A lot of folks have indifference that hurts them because they become indifferent to paradox and contradiction in their own ideas. And that's a dangerous thing to have. Because if you care about being indifferent, I'm going to say that again. If you care about being indifferent to where your ideas break down, you will defend that decision tooth and nail to the point that the only thing you care about is not learning anything new at all. So that's where indifference can hurt a person. It's no different if I explain it this way. It's no different if you tell me I'm wrong or not. So that's how indifference can hurt a person. Now let's talk about how indifference can help a person, right? So when indifference is pointed at you and what you could do, what you could think, and what you could know, when indifference is pointed at perspective, perspective makes everything look the same. I'm going to write that down too. When indifference is pointed at perspective, everything looks the same. When indifference is pointed at change, then you've got a couple of roads that you can go down. Indifference is not a permanent state of mind that will do anything for you. There's a lot of things it won't do. So if you're measuring your life by the things that don't happen, instead of by the things that do happen, indifference will feel like a great option. Maybe it is. Indifference works when someone is trying to change you before you know why. That is when indifference can be your best friend. Because people try to change other people all the time. And most conversations are an attempt at this on a very, very small scale. The attempt isn't to change the person at their core. The attempt is to change a person's perspective or idea or decision on one small thing. So if a person has a goal and their goal becomes making you do a thing, or making you say a thing, or making you be a thing, or making you agree to do a whatever, well, that's a decision you have to make. And it is your decision. So if a person doesn't care very much about your value as a person compared to their own, it makes sense that that person would do everything they could to make you indifferent to wanting to make that choice yourself. So how to use indifference? Protect yourself. Is when somebody tells you something is not different, choose the opposite of the thing that they say it's not different from, and tell them to say why you need to go the other way. Because if they need your indifference to make their idea work, their idea is not very good at all. I'm going to make that the trifecta to the thing I said. Someone else needs your difference. Make their, so you need your indifference on many perspectives. I'm going to add that. On one or many perspectives. There's on one or many perspectives. Make their idea work. Their idea is not very strong at all. So that's when indifference will help you. I say, well, hang on, I don't care what you think about what I think. And I'm not going to do anything until I know what's going on. Do you want to do that? Do you want to give me that? Is that okay that I understand the words coming out of your mouth before I make a decision and agree with you? Is it okay that I have questions before I just say, hey, you've got it and I don't? Am I allowed to explore these things? Indifference builds walls because it takes everything that is there and makes it the same thing. Do not passcode. Do not collect $200. You can if you want to, but nobody would because nobody cares. There's no significance to this moment. So indifference, if you want to use indifference in ways that do not make you indifferent to the world around you, if you want to use indifference properly, and by properly I mean so that you don't get stuck in a cycle of just saying everything is relative to how much I care. It's a stupid way to measure the world, by the way. How much you care about things is very easily manipulated. There's been books and books written about it. And if you don't believe me, turn the news off for a week. Find out how much you legitimately care about things in the world versus how much you care about those things because they're just the things in front of you all the time. That's the test. And if you care very much about not turning on the news, or if you care very much about not turning off the news, because you just really need to know what's going on, to me, that looks very similar to not knowing what's important and not caring to know what's important. Easier to be told what's important. Fine. As long as it's choice and that there's other alternatives. Now, here's the thing about indifference, though. When indifference is used poorly, it causes misery. Because it lets misery grow. It creates it and it lets it get stronger. Nobody cares. People become indifferent to what they could do to help. Why? Because it's no different if they help or they don't. So they pick the easier thing. So indifference is entropy on some levels. It's entropy. So if you want something to break down over time, be indifferent to it. And that includes somebody else coming up in your shit and telling you what you got to do. You want to keep them coming around? Fight them with anger. You want to keep them coming around? Give them a pat on the back. You want them to go away? Don't respond. Pretend like they're dead. Their words don't exist. Kids know how to play that game. When you do that, it's important. So I'm going to tell you what I feel the most appropriate use of indifference is. Sometimes a tool has its most effective use when that tool is limited to destroying itself. So I'll look at indifference the way that I look at other metaphors within mental martial arts, which is 5 lectures on this, builds a metaphorical framework for what that means. Indifference is defense, defensiveness. It's a lack of engagement. But at the core of it, it's really just the wearing down of things. So indifference makes a poor weapon of attack, which is where it becomes weak, because the person extolling the virtues of indifference needs to do so with some amount of passion. So they have to become a hypocrite just to say what they want. Whereas the person who views indifference as a potential, well, I only have to be indifferent when someone is telling me that what I care about doesn't matter, or isn't relevant, or shouldn't be allowed, or that they have authority over me when they don't. They need me to do something for them, and the only way they can get it is if I am so disgusted by what they're doing that I no longer care to say no. That's when indifference will do a lot. Because guess what? When someone is asking for indifference, they think it's powerful. And you can show them how powerful it is instead of giving in. And it's easy. Do that one of two ways. One, you can just walk away. You don't have to say shit. You don't have to type a comment. You don't have to hit send. You don't have to do nothing. If you want that to hit a little deeper, you can put in a little dig right before you go, specifically about what's happening. Hey, you don't care about what I'm saying. You're telling me not to care, and you're getting more and more angry about it the farther that I go. So I'm going to take your advice and not care, but I'm going to use that advice the way I think it matters. I'm not going to care about what you say. So go ahead. Call me names. Tell me make yourself look like the biggest hero in the planet. Write a book about how good you are and how bad that I am. Post it online for everybody to read. And then if you're a wise student of psychology and you've done the lectures on shadow boxing, go back and read that comment and apply it to yourself. It's very rare that somebody gets worked up and angry about somebody who's doing something. If somebody's in a dichotomy like that, people use the same weapons. They use the same ideas, like racism. I think that's a great example. Hey, let's separate everybody by race because some people are better than others. What? No, that's obviously wrong. We're not going to separate people by race. People aren't obviously better than others. They have the same nervous system. They have the same brain parts. Color of the skin really doesn't have much to do with what's inside the person's mind. And you can find examples all over of people of every race who are the pinnacle of human achievement. And you can find people from every race who are the pinnacle of human trash. And to think that one color of the skin has a monopoly on that over the other is stupid. Which is the same thing as saying racism is stupid when people do it. I dare you to argue with that. Make the case for intelligent racism. No, a lot of people do that. White people can't understand blank. Asian people will never do whatever. Fill in the blank. Fill in the racist thing. Black people will always quotas, affirmative action. Point is, you can't end a separation of race by dividing race. That's indifference to what makes us the same. That's where racism fails. At least the counter explanation for it. And I think there's a very specific reason for that. It's every time somebody talks about racism this way, they get shot. You're only allowed to talk about racism in the ways that keeps it going. You ever notice that? Ever notice you're only allowed to talk about racism in the ways that do not progress the conversation beyond the division of skin color? Why do you think that is? Difference is why. When things don't change, people who are benefiting now are happy. So I could imagine a world where a lot more people were happy because racism didn't exist. Some hypothetical world in the future where we figured the damn thing out. And then we laugh at how stupid we were by making all these rules that say we have to divide everybody in this very specific way so that we can end the division of people in very specific ways. It's possible to put your head so far up your ass that you turn yourself inside out. At the very least, you can walk around again. Then you can see things. Things that you couldn't see when your head was only halfway up your ass. Believe that. And that's what racism looks like to me right now. And guess what? That'll make a lot of people very angry because I challenge the indifference. I'm telling you, people are not. It's different. You want the things that make us the same matter a lot more than the things that make us different. But if your brain's only big enough to hold one of those, I've met people of every race and color and creed and religious and political affiliation whose brains are only big enough to have one of those. Well, then of course it's going to feel like you're losing something. Guess what? You're losing. You're losing your indifference. How much does your indifference matter to you? How hard will you fight to be indifferent? Well, that's a different question. You could say that that question is also the same as how much would you fight to keep everything exactly the same? Well, that's what conversations are. Conversations are attempts to change, evolve. Hey, what if we did this? No, we can't. It just won't happen. Well, what about this? No, because of this. What about that? Because of that. Because of this. Because of this. Well, then I guess you're just fucked. It's not my job to come up with infinity solutions that could do the job when your only solution is that nothing can do the job. Or even worse, the only solution is the core behavior of all humanity just needs to change. And when I say that, I'm saying something very specific. So I don't want the meaning to get lost. I'm going to take a moment to explain what I mean by that. Human beings will always be human beings with feelings. Human beings will always be human beings who react to things that go on around them. They will respond poorly when people hurt them. They will respond poorly when people are angry at them. They will respond poorly to when they need things that they do not get. They will respond poorly when they are forced to do things that they think go against their moral compass. So any solution that requires a circumvention of observable humanity since the beginning of humans is not well thought out enough to survive in the real world. If that idea were a baby, it would be stillborn. It's got some qualities that make it an idea that could do some things, but there's no life in it. There's no desire for it to have life. It wants to be what it is. But it's a creature of indifference, so it dies. So when I talk about consciousness and indifference, indifference is to kill things. It's a violent process. It's a negating process. It's an opposing process. Indifference is not a pacifist approach. If you get down to it, pacifism cares about life. Not choosing violence is not pacifism. Not unless there's a lot of other stuff going on behind the scenes that are doing other things about that. Oh, I don't believe in violence. I'm a pacifist. Are you capable of violence? No. Okay, then it doesn't matter what you believe. I don't believe in flying to the moon without a spaceship. We're both equally right in that example. It's a bad example. Like I could believe whatever I wanted if that's how we're measuring stuff. And I got a better imagination, so I could do that all day. I like it when people play that game with me because I get to stretch my creative muscles. I could be sillier. My silliness has no limit. My seriousness has no limit. Whatever I say, that limit is. And that's everybody. We set our own limits. Being indifferent to your limits. There you go. Well, that can help a person and that can hurt a person. Something that you physically can't do. How much does that bother you? Give me 1,000 examples for that, so I can leave that vague. Your body is not designed to do the thing that you wish it could. You're talking about athletics, you're talking about music, you're talking about something else. Fill in the blank. How much does that limitation impact your life? Garrett? Does it not bother you? You look at it, say, I could never do that thing, so maybe it's a waste of energy trying. Or do you say, you know what, if I cared enough about that thing, maybe I could change it. Maybe impossible is a word that people are throwing around too much. Maybe that's true. So what do you do in that situation? Well, a lot of people will give you a lot of free advice you didn't ask for. I'm not going to be any different. But the difference, hopefully, between the types of advice you listen to is the advice that the person who's giving follows themselves. So I can't tell you what you should do when you run into a situation like that, because everybody hits a physical limitation in one way or another. Death is the ultimate physical limitation. I never want to die. I care very much about not dying. I'm going to spend all my time worrying about not dying. No? Every moment that you live, you hit that goal. And so does everybody else who didn't give a damn about that goal, as long as they're alive. What have they done with their time that you haven't? Or maybe you do make a difference. Hey, I'm going to watch my diet. I'm going to work out on a regular basis because I care very much about being alive. And then maybe you get an extra few years out of that. And maybe the years that you do have left are spent in different health. Because it does add up and it does catch up. Like people don't all of a sudden just get old and die. That's not a sudden thing. Your life is a culmination of things. And the choices you make matter. They carry through yourself into the future. So the things you don't care about add up over time by the holes they create. And if you're smart about the things that you don't care about, you will never miss them when you find out they're gone. So to finish up the lecture, then I'm going to start to close it out. What do you do? How do you use indifference? How do you spot it? How do you know what to avoid? Well, you're gonna have to make that decision yourself. I'll tell you what I do. Judge people by their own standard. And don't apply that standard to everybody else, because they're not everybody else. To them, they're somebody. Remember that. If you want to, that's the only time people run from the idea that everyone who is not them is someone else, is when something's happening to them that's not fair. And then everybody's involved. Then they become everybody. Oh, don't you love to see that transformation? But they're only everybody so far as they care about what they want. The rest of it doesn't matter. So when I look to indifference, I ask myself, when does it hurt my life? When does it help? That's step one. If you're going to talk about indifference, you need to ask yourself, when is it good and when is it bad? You have to decide what good and bad mean. But for me, good and bad means, when does it make my life less difficult? When does it give me a greater percentage of long-term success as I understand it? When does it let me connect with people more than it separates me from them? That's a good one. When can I use indifference to connect? And when am I using indifference to set myself apart so I don't have to bother? Someone might say something that sets me off balance. Something unpalatable, something off-putting. Better to just not care about them in advance, right? A very good strategy. Look out for people that tell you not to care about things. Nobody who cares about you as a person tell you not to care about something that matters to you. They will tell you how to care about it better. So that's red flag number one. Do not trust anybody that tells you flat out not to care. And if you want to know if someone's lying to you and is using words that will sound like they're trying to be compassionate, they will tell you why you shouldn't care. Again, I separate morality from lying like that. It's a strange thing to say, but it's very specific, so don't get lost in the wordplay. There's a difference between lying on purpose because you're trying to deceive somebody and spreading a lie because you have been fooled by it yourself. That's where indifference comes in. When indifference fails, it creates salesmen because it needs a larger workforce to keep itself going. I'll write that down. Indifference fails. It tries to expand its workforce. So you have to ask yourself, do you want to work for somebody who's telling you all the ways you shouldn't care? Would you rather work for yourself for reasons that matter to you? Well, I didn't have any participation today, so ironically, my lecture on indifference met with the highest percentage of attendance indifference yet. But I don't put any morality to that too, because a lot of my students have busy lives. And, they know they can always catch the replay, and they do. So that's all I've got. Hopefully, you know, it's kind of weird to say, I hope I made you care about indifference more. But having empathy for a thing is understanding it. And if you understand indifference more than you did at the start, then maybe you do care more about indifference. And I think that's a good thing, because if you care about something, you will care when it goes wrong. So that's all I've got to say about that. Thanks for watching this part of the series, and I'll catch you next time. There's only 5 left. Okay.